I'm going to highlight 5 poetic forms in this slide. Now, there are other poetic forms out there, but many of these other forms are so similar that these are the 5 main forms we teach boys and girls in school. The first one is the rhymed verse, and this is the most common form of poetry with some sort of rhyming scheme. Rhyming poems are great for young learners. They're fun to read and they're interesting when you do read-alouds with them. Boys and girls very quickly jump in, and it's a great tool to use when practicing fluency. Some examples of rhyme verse are just typical rhyme poems, but also limericks, couplets, and sonnets fall under this category. The second poetic form is narrative poetry. A narrative poem is a poem that tells us a story. It often makes use of the voices of narrators and characters. Sometimes our narrative poems also have story elements, just like a fiction story. Some narrative poems rhyme, but others do not, so it's not a requirement for a narrative poem. The third type of poem is called haiku. This is a Japanese art form, and it has 17 syllables in the entire poem. So these poems are very short, precise, and simple. The poetry lines in a Japanese poem are the first line 5 syllables total, the second line 7 syllables total, and the third line is 5 syllables again. This gives the poem this short, crisp effect, and it also gives it a nice rhythm because of the syllables. The fourth poetic form is free verse, and this is an unrhymed type of poetry with an emphasis on word choice and visual imagery. Sometimes free verse is just like spoken word. It's random. People often do not understand free verse because they're looking for that rhyming pattern. But boys and girls actually are very effective writers of free verse. We sometimes call them phrase poems because they can brainstorm about a topic and you can put the phrases together and they make a really neat poem. So free verse is easy for boys and girls, probably easier than coming up with a poem that has a rhyming pattern. So it's a nice one to start with. An alternate version of the free verse is free verse for 2 voices, and this is where we have side-by-side poems that are complementary verses. And sometimes they're read simultaneously, but oftentimes it's one line for one line. So reader 1 reads the line and then reader 2, and it's a back and forth type of sharing. They're very fun for students, and sometimes we even use these in the content areas to have a poem about information that they've learned. The last poetic form is a concrete poem. These are also known as shape poems because the words and the lines are arranged on a page to create a picture that's visual and matches the theme of the poem. Shape poems or concrete poems may rhyme, but oftentimes they're more like a free verse and have just words and phrases about a topic. Again, these are 5 main poetic forms. There are others out there, but many of the poems that we use with young children fall into these 5 categories.